Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Menachot Taf Yud Aleph. We're going to get started with the very end of Yud Amud Bet. There's two shiurim that went up that are connected to today's daf. I think they're both up, maybe not, but if not, they will be. One is Gefet, which is about the Lavona, okay, which is I think it's something that's harder to relate to, right? For those who went to the Menachot workshop, we got to do Menachot. We didn't actually bring any incense, frankincense. I recommend, by the way, because this is going to be useful for today's stuff, that you Google what frankincense looks like. For those who don't know what it looks like, just have a sense. Okay, it looks like pebbles, looks like those. You ever see the sugar? There's sugar cubes, but there's fancy ones like in different shapes, and they look like granules. So that's really what we have going on here. They're granules of look like these big salts. That's first of all. So this Gefet, really all about the frankincense. And the other one we're going to get at the very end of today's daf to pebble, and Alana in Din and Daf has a whole thing about pebble and the whole thing that we really discussed in Zvachim about how the rabbis took this one pasuk and took it completely out of the simple reading. It's really about notar, and they took it to pebble. So definitely recommended if you have time to go more in depth into those things. Okay, we're going to start with the very bottom of Yud Amud Bet, which is a quote from our Mishnah. Kamatz v'ala b'yado tzror or garger melach or koret levona pasul. So if while you're doing the kemitza, let's just remember what happens. You have a dough mixed with the solet, the fine flour, and some water and probably oil, depending on which one it is. And then you put the levona on top of it. You move the levona off to the frankincense. You move it off to the side. You put your fingers in and you take out the kometz. Okay, that's what the Kohen does. Now, if when you're doing it, somehow a pebble got mixed in or a granule of salt got mixed in and it actually came in your hand with the kemitza, or the frankincense, which was already there and maybe fell in, even though you put it to the side, maybe you didn't do a good enough job, and it ends up in your kemitza, it's a problem. Why is it a problem? Because we learned that it has to be an exact amount. And if you're now going to have less of a handful than you were supposed to have because there's something else in there. So the Gemara asks, Kol hani lamali. Why did the Mishnah have to bring three examples? You could have learned this, right? One example would have been enough. You get the idea. So they say it's tzricha. You needed all of them. Why? To eat on a tzror, if you said a pebble, mishum de lav bar hakravahi. Now, a pebble can never be offered on the altar. So it makes sense that it would ruin it because you're bringing this to the altar to burn. Aval melach, but salt, de bar hakravahi. Well, salt gets put, and we're going to get into this in a few dapim, salt gets placed on all the korbanot. So in any case, salt is going to be added to it later. So what's the difference if there's some salt in it now? Matit kasher. So you might have thought it would be okay. But no, because again, because it's not related to, is this a foreign object or is this something that at least will be sacrificed later anyway with it? But no, it's a problem because again, what's the main reason? Because it's missing something. V'it hanamelach. Now, if you said salt, you'd say, look, delo ikba bahade mincha meikara. Okay, it doesn't belong in the mincha at this point. The salt gets added later. Okay, we keep having all these things in parentheses, which some of them are different versions, but often, like in this case, and we're going to see later today, they're really somebody's notes that ended up getting incorporated into the text, the printed text, right? When they printed the text, sometimes, right, they saw notes on the side that maybe they thought meant, oh, put this in, and really it was just someone's notes on the side. But you can read it because it helps you, right? Because you only put the salt in to the kometz itself. You don't put it in the dough, you put it in later onto the kometz before you burn it. So yes, it belongs on the altar, so it's different from the rocks, but no, it doesn't belong in this dough at this point. As opposed to the lavona. Of a lavona, the ikba bahadi mincha meikara ematit kasher. But if you had the rock and you had the salt, you might have thought, okay, those don't belong here in the first place, so they're still considered somewhat foreign substances, right? The rock, the pebble completely, the salt foreign right now, even though it will be there later, but the lavona, which anyway is supposed to be in the bowl, so if it comes up with it, maybe it's not a big deal. Kamash malan. That's why you needed all three cases to show the progression of the problems here. Mipdesha amru. Now we're back to the line in the Mishnah because they said a kometz chaser or hayatil pasul. So now they say, my iri mishum chaser v'yatil. Like, why'd you say it's a problem if any of these things are in there because it's now got too much or too little? But typically, mishum chatzitza. It should be more because it's an interposition. In other words, what happens? The Kohen has to be holding the kemitza in his hand. If there's something now, whenever you have to hold it in your hand, okay, we even thought the Kohen has to stand on the floor. If he can't, right, if he's standing on something else, it's a problem, right? There's all sorts of things where some interposition, something in between is going to make it a problem. So if there's some other something in there, that's going to create this chatzitza between the hand of the Kohen and the object that he's holding, the kemitza. So they say, I'm a Rabbi Yirmiyah minatzad. Rabbi Yirmiyah comes up with, he's good at coming up with, outrageous cases or extreme, some out of the box case. He says, it could be, I'm trying to envision this exactly, but I think what this means is the Kohen takes his 3 fingers, right? Which we're going to talk about soon. And you're not actually supposed to know that yet. But he takes his 3 fingers, right, and he scoops up a piece of it. Now, there's a part on the side where the thumb and the pinky are where there's a little space. Now, it could be it's there, and it's sticking out on the side, and it's not actually in between where the Kohen's hand is touching the kometz, because it's jutting out a little, or it's just on the side where there's no actual finger of the Kohen there. It's just like a space, like this. So maybe that's what he means, minatzad. That's what it sounds like. Okay, now, before we read the next section, you have to really look at the next Mishnah, because there seems to be another editing issue here, which is that the next Mishnah says, ketzad hu oseh, just look down further on the page. How does he do the kemitza? Poshet etzba'otav al pas yado. He takes his hands and his fingers, and he extends them to his palm, right? All the way, right? From, you don't like put them just a little bit like as if you're making a tight fist, but no, like a loose fist, not really even a fist, but take your fingers and put them to the end of your hand. That's what the Mishnah says. Okay, then there's a second line in the Mishnah. Now, when we get to that next Mishnah, you're going to see the Gemara immediately starts discussing the second line and ignores this line. And it seems that the section of the Gemara right now is relating to that line. Okay, so it seems that this line really belonged in the previous Mishnah. And I believe, I didn't actually check, but I saw that it says in books of the Mishnah, you'll see it really belongs it's part of the previous Mishnah. And for whatever reason, the editor by accident somehow put it over there, but really it belongs here. And these words of Abaye to Rava are going to be specifically about this topic. So Amarle Abaye le Rava. Abaye says to Rava, ketzad komtzim. How do we do the kemitza? Amarle, kedekamtze inashe. Great answer. He says, like people take handfuls, okay? Same way you would imagine anyone taking a handful. Now, if you're imagining someone taking a handful, would you think you do it with the 3 fingers and then the 2 on the side? No. So Rava must mean with all 5 fingers, okay, the way you would take a handful. So imagine, putting your hand in, scooping something out, right? It's really called scooping, right? That's the best way to explain it. Scooping it out the way people do it. So Etive, they bring a difficulty for Rava. Wait a minute. Okay, now we're going to bring a braita that talks about what are the names of the 5 fingers. Okay, it sounds like those songs you sing to little kids, what are to learn what your names of the 5 fingers are. But it's a little bit different because the names of the 5 fingers, very interestingly, each are named that way because our fingers have a purpose, okay? It's almost like this theory of, right, that God gave us a body for a reason, right? We have 5 fingers. Each finger serves a purpose. It's not just their stem, but each one serves a purpose. So now we're going to see the purpose of each of the 5 fingers, and it corresponds to the name, what they're called. Zozeret. Okay, I don't know if you all know the names of the fingers in Hebrew, but you'll learn them right now if you don't. Zeret is the pinky. Why is it called a zeret? Okay, so for this you have to look in Shmot. In Shmot, chapter 28, when it talks about the choshen, okay, there was the breastplate of the Kohen, it says, Vasita choshen mishpat, blah, blah, blah. Ravua yiyeh kaful. Okay, that's just describing the shape. Zeret or kova zeret rochbo. It's a measurement, okay? This is, right, people used to measure. They didn't have rulers. They used their bodies to measure. So we're going to see 2 measurements here today. One is the zeret, so that's a measurement, okay? This is the length of your pinky. Okay, that's why it's called the zeret. Zo kemitza, okay, your what we call the ring finger in English is not called the, right, by the way, in English also, it's where you put your ring, right? So now, what is it? Kemitza. Kemitza, why is it called the kemitza? Here's the problem. It's called the kemitza because it's the finger that's the most important one in the kemitza. It's the one that closes up when you take the kemitza. It's the 4th finger. And that's the problem with Rava. He said all your fingers. Okay, anyway, let's keep going. Zoama, the middle finger is called the amma. Why is it called the amma? What's an amma? An amma is an arm's length. How do you measure an arm's length? From your elbow, again, a measurement. From your elbow to the end of your middle finger. That's how you measure an amma. So that's why it's called an amma. Zo etzba, this is the finger. Okay, now, why do they call that? What's the purpose? Well, where does finger come up in the Torah? We've seen this a lot in our Vas to Masechta. V'tavalet etzba'o badam, right? He dips his finger into the blood, and then he puts it on wherever, right? On the altar for the chatat, on the leper for the leper, okay? All that. And zo gudal, which that one's a little bit more of a weakness, but they say that has a purpose, which is the thumb, and here it's a little less related to the name, although I don't know, maybe I didn't look up enough to see, maybe there's someone who says something better, but Rashi says it's for the behonot of the mitzorah. The mitzorah, you have to put it on his thumb. So that's the purpose of the thumb, that, again, the leper process, it's hard to say that's the whole purpose of a thumb, but the leper process goes there. Okay, that's the weak point of this whole thing. But anyway, the point being the middle finger, right? And if you think about it, when you take the three fingers and you close them, if you try to do it, it's really that bottom finger that's working the most, okay, the ring finger. So how do we explain Rava? If he said you use all five fingers, and it's very clear from this braita that this is the kemitza is the fourth finger, not the fifth, ela lahashvot. They say all five fingers are being used. It's just that. Now, there's two ways to read this. One is that according to Rava, you actually take it with all five fingers, and then you take your top and your bottom finger and your pinky and your thumb, and you basically remove all the extra. Or possibly you really only do the kemitza with three and you use the other two. And what Rava is saying is all five fingers are working here. Okay? They're not all doing the same thing. They have different jobs. Okay, so now, and if you see in parentheses, I told you about these footnotes, right, or side notes that were added to the text. This clearly takes one approach here. I'll read it inside. But remember, this isn't the Gemara itself. Klomar kometz milo hayad kedei shelo yeh chaser v'achar kach mochek be'etzba ketana milamata, which basically means you take all five fingers, scoop the handful with all five fingers, and then rub off the extra. But not everybody goes with this interpretation. Some people think he means, like we've always said, take three and then, take it with the three fingers and then do that. Okay, hechi avid. So how exactly do you do it? So Amar Rav Zutra. So that explained at least what fingers we use, but how do you actually do it? Amar Rav Zutra bar Tuvi Amarav chofeh shalosh etzbaotav ad shemagia al pas yado v'kometz. So you extend your three fingers out all the way until you get to the palm, and then you do the kemitza like that. Tanya namihachi. Here's a braita that explains this also. Milo kumtzo. Now it says do a full handful. Yachol mevoratz. Well, if you say a full handful, right, if I tell you measure a full tablespoon, that could mean two things. That could mean flat full tablespoon, or it could mean a heaping full tablespoon. So you might have thought it's heaping. Talmud lomar bikumtzo. Okay, bit means in. In its kometz. In makes it sound like just what's in the handful and not any more than that. So ibakumtzo, once you're already limiting it then and saying, well, not heaping, you might have thought, Yachol b'rashei etzbaotav. Maybe just curl your fingers a little bit, right? So you're going to get to, like, let's say if I do that, I'll get to the middle of my palm or more toward the top of my palm and not a full one. So obviously what they can say, no, Talmud Omar, milo kumtzo. Now that's why you need to extend your fingers all the way down to the end of your palm because you need a full kometz. Okay, full but not overfull. HaKetzad, so how exactly do you do this? Okay, so the braita continues. This actually supports what we saw before. So you bend your three fingers all the way down into the bottom of your palm, and then you do the kemitza. Now, if you have a machvad or marcheshet, mincha is a little bit different because you're not putting your finger into dough. There you fry it first. You take all the dough, you fry it up. Then you break it into pieces, okay? Each one's fried in a different thing. One is more a flat griddle pan. For those who went to the workshop, you saw them actually. It's a really fat griddle pan, flat griddle pan. And then the marcheshet is a much deeper one. Okay, so because of that, he explained it very well, that the flat one, it's like a crepe. You can't put much in it because it's going to spill over the sides. So it becomes very thin. And then therefore it's kind of... even though a crepe is kind of soft, but it gets harder because it's very thin. The marcheshet is deeper. Because it's deeper, it's thicker. You can put a lot more batter in because it's deeper, and then it ends up being soft. Either which way, you make them like that. Then you want to take a kemitza from there, but you can't be kometz something that's whole. What do? You break it into pieces. This in the Torah is called petitim, okay, or patit. I forget exactly the way it's phrased in the Torah. It's a few times. Patoto tapitim, something like that. It says. So you break it into these small pieces, and then you have to do the kemitza from those small pieces, as opposed to from a soft dough. Okay, it's a little bit trickier. Okay, mochek begodalo milamalo be'etzba'o ketana milamata. Why is it tricky? Well, it's tricky because, and that's what we're going to see in a minute, zoe avodah kashasha b'mikdash. This is a very difficult avodah to do in the mikdash because when you stick it into the dough, it's not so hard. You just scrape the sides off, right? Assuming the dough's not so sticky. But if it's broken up into pieces and they're not like, it's, well, that's actually, if I remember, there's a machloket about how fine you break them up into pieces. But it's not really fine like flour. And even if it was fine like flour, they even say the menachot is also tricky because it's so fine and dry that it's very hard to get it exact. You really want to get it exact. That's what we saw. It has to be a completely whole handful, not more, not less. So to do that, when you have these big chunks, and you have to brush them off on the side, not only that, the other part that's very tricky is you're doing everything with one hand. You can't use your other hand to help you. It's all done with one hand, which we're going to see similar to the next thing we're going to talk about, which was tricky and hard to do. And you have to basically, use these two fingers. It's a little harder to use your pinky to do that, right? Your pinky doesn't work as well as your thumb, and brush off anything extra on the sides without knocking off anything that's inside and, right, getting it just right. So this is challenging. Zovatulo, wait a minute. This is the hardest thing to do in the temple? Wait, aren't there more? Ha'ika, you might remember, we've talked about this. Melika. Remember melika? There were all different ways about how to do it, how you hold it in your hand and you use your thumb and the Kohen has to basically, in one hand, hold the bird and put the thumb into the back of the neck and kill the bird in that way. It's very tricky. And ha'ika chafina. Chafina is, now you think, okay, kemitza is taking a handful. Chafina is 2 handfuls, okay? You take 2 handfuls, the Kohen takes 2 handfuls of the ktoret, of the incense, and brings it into the Kodesh Kodeshim. Now, what here is tricky is not the taking the handfuls. That's pretty easy. It's 2 hands, and you do that. What's tricky is this. The Kohen has to go into the Kodesh Kodeshim. You remember, he's carrying in one hand, this was the whole thing we talked about, small. In his right hand, he has the coals, burning coals. Okay, that he's got the pan with the burning coals on it. In his right, he's not holding burning coals, he's holding the pan with the coals. Then in his right hand, he has a spoon, like a big spoon, with like a ladle or something, with the ktoret, the incense. Now he walks into the Kodesh Kodeshim. He puts down the coals, okay, but now what does he have to do? He has to take what he took before and he put into this kaf. Now he has to basically dump it into his 2 hands again. That is not simple to do. Try to imagine. Again, it's the same idea. You're using, okay, even though there he's using 2 hands, but really your action is done with 1 hand, trying to dump it into your both hands without anything falling on the floor. This is quite challenging. So, right, the Kohanim had not easy work. Besides, they had to eat all this dry bread, but also it wasn't an easy job. Okay, so this is fine. It wasn't the most difficult job. It was one of the most difficult jobs. Okay, there's a whole list of things that the Kohanim had to do that were tricky. Amar of Papa, and again, all of them are tricky in the sense, right? There could be all sorts of things that are challenging, but this is kind of challenging in a sense that you have only one hand to do it with, and you might spill, you might mess it up. It's just a tricky kind of job. Okay, Amar of Papa. Now we're going to have a slew of questions from here to the end until the next Mishna. It's all going to be questions that are going to end in teku. We're not going to have answers to them. So Amar Papa, pshitali, and by the way, it's going to be a little hard to understand the reality here. We're going to go with one approach of the commentaries. There's different opinions here as usual. Pshitali melokumtso kedikam seinashe. So I understand melokumtso is the way people take the comments, and that's kind of how we described it. And what he seems to mean here is, how do people do it? If you would scoop something up, the assumption here is how you're going to hold your hand. Your hand's going to be with your pinky at the bottom. Your hand is going to be basically standing up, like the way your hand normally is. Okay? You put your pinky at the bottom and thumb is at the top, and you basically put your hand into the dough and then scoop it up. Okay? Like the way you would scoop. Okay? Take your hand, do a scoop. That's the assumption of how we would do it. But by Rav Papa, what if kamatz b'rashei etzba'otav? What if you had your fingers facing down? So you turn your hand to the side, your fingers face down, you put your hand in and scoop it up kind of like that. Okay? What about that? Or minat stadimai. What if the palm of your hand is face down? So you put your palm in, and your hand is kind of going in a motion going downward. As your hand goes into the dough comes in from the sides into your hand. What about that? Would that work? Mimata lamalamai. What if you just put it straight down, kind of quickly maybe, and then it goes over your hand? It comes as you're putting your hand down, not from the sides really, but you kind of put your hand all the way down and then pick it up, and within that you've scooped it. Mai. Teku. Okay, so he doesn't have an answer. These are atypical manners. The atypical manners, like all these ways of doing it, would they work? In the end, you scooped it. On the other hand, perhaps it has a very particular way it has to be done. And again, in all these cases, we're only talking about the scoop is from the 3 fingers, and you're going to move use the other fingers on the sides to flatten it out, but that's not the issue. Now we're going to do the same thing with Maloch Hofnav. Rav Papa's going to ask, okay, I understand the typical way to do it, but what about atypical ways? Amar Papa, Pshitali Maloch Hofnav Kedechafne Inashe. Okay, so again, you're going to take your hands, put them in with your pinky down, your thumb facing up, put them in, each one separate, bring them together while you're in the bowl, right, of incense, and pick it up like that. That's the typical way you would do it. But what if minat stadim mahu? Oh, sorry. Chafan brashe etzbotav mahu. Okay, so sorry, I skipped some words, but here. Pshita li melo chofnav kedechafnei nashi. That I understand. But by Rav Papa, but then he asked, Chafan brashe etzbotav mahu. What if you put your fingers going face down into the bowl? It's a little awkward to do this, but do that and then pick them up, scoop them down and pick them up. Or minat stadimau, what if you put, again, your palms facing, right, your fingers facing up, your palms facing down, the back of your palm facing down, you put it downward, and the Torah goes into your hands from the sides, and then you pull them together. Or chafan bezo v'kervanzo, it's also, or what if you did each one separately and then put them together? Would that work? We don't have an answer. Now, Rav Papa moves to the third series of questions, which is, what about placing it in the sanctified vessel? What if you place it in the sanctified vessel in an atypical manner? Okay, so we take the komets, we put it in the vessel. Now, what if, Papa says, dav ke lekomets bedafne demanamai. What if you stuck it on the side of the kli? Okay, remember, it's sticky. So you just stick it on the side. That's not really the way you would put something in a bowl. If you put something in a bowl, you're going to put it at the bottom, in the center. But what if you stuck it on the side, on the walls? Toch kli be'inan v'ha'ika. Do we say, it just needs to be in the bowl, and this is in the bowl? Or maybe you need to put it inside properly, and this is not the way. That's not inside. Take. By Marbar Rav Ashi, he asks another question. Now we're going to have someone else comes in, but a similar type question. Before we explain what this means, imagine a not modern Kiddush cup, okay, like the typical Kiddush cups, where it has a cup at the top. The bottom has this stand that if you turn it upside down, it actually is a cup in and of itself. Now, you wouldn't really use it as a cup, but theoretically, you could stand it up, upside down, and you would have what we call a baked kibul. We have an area where you could actually put some wine in there. So what if you have your sanctified vessel, which is like that also? It has a base. And when you turn it upside down, it could also catch something, right? It could hold something. That's what it says here. If you flipped it, and dab kelekomets bar ita demanamai, and you put it in the bottom of the vessel while it was upside down, what would be the case? Does it just need putting inside? And this is inside. So what if it's upside down, right? Odilma kitikno be'inam melika, or does it have to be done in its typical manner? The way you would look very strangely at someone if they pour their cup of kiddush in the part that was upside down, right? Same thing in a sanctified vessel. If you use it upside down, it would be weird. Teku. So we don't have an answer to this question. So like I said, these are all questions about atypical manners. And it makes sense that we're in the temple here and we're talking about, do things have to be done in their normal way, right? Anything that causes someone like a red light, that's weird. We don't want people to be looking and saying, this is not the typical way we do things, and thinking this is strange. Or maybe it doesn't really matter. As long as we're fulfilling the letter of the law, so to speak, it will work. Okay, now we get to this Mishna that we already read the first line. So that we explain, we'll move on to the next. Riba shamna, chisal shamna, chisar levonota psula. If you put too much oil, or too little oil, or not enough frankincense, psula, it's disqualified, okay, or it's missing some of the frankincense. So now, what's the amount? So normally a mincha has 1 isaron, which is about, we talked about this, 1.9 kilo. Again, every time we talk about a shiur, there's a range of opinions about how much, but let's say the average is 1.9 kilo of flour. Then you put in 1 log of oil. What if you put in more oil or less oil? So the Mishnah says disqualified. If you didn't put in enough lavona, or it's missing some of the lavona, it's a problem. Okay, so now we're going to start trying to understand this. What is too much oil? I'm a Rabbi Elazar. This should be Rabbi Elazar, not Rabbi Eliezer, because it's in Amora talking. That's Rabbi Elazar from Israel. There is no Amora that we know called Rabbi Eliezer. There's always problems with it because they look the same. It's just with a yud, without a yud. We often have girsa problems. Amar Rabbi Elazar, kigon sheiflisha shnei lugin. If you did 2 log, it's a problem. Now we're going to read this sugya according to Rashi. Like I said, in many sugyas, there's different ways of reading it, and there's a little problem with Rashi, but we'll go with Rashi. Rashi says what we mean here is if you did double the amount of oil, it's a problem. Why? Rashi says because near 8 kishtei halechem, the shtei halechem has 2 log of oil. Because the shtei halechem has 2 log of oil, it's going to look like you're making a shtei halechem instead of a mincha offering. So it's a problem because of that. Any less than 2 log, it's just, okay, so you added some extra oil. It's not a big deal. It's not like the oil has to be exactly like this. The komets had to be exactly the right size. But oil, it doesn't matter. You can add some more oil. It's just a problem once you add double the amount. That already looks like it's something else. Now, the way Rashi understands this question is, why didn't we say adding any more oil would be a problem? Like shemen of chulin. Okay, now the assumption of the 2 log, there's 2 things going on. One is the measurement, the amount, and Rashi says that seems to be an issue. Also, it seems that the 2 log is, I put 2 log for this offering. What if I added some extra oil from a different offering, or there was chulin entirely, it wasn't even sanctified, and then I add it to this offering, or I take someone else's, shemen de chaverta, you had a mincha you were bringing, and it was already sanctified to be used, the oil, and then I use that. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean I stole it. It just means, let's say you didn't need it anymore, I don't know, and then I used your oil that was already sanctified. The point being, according to Rashi, again, it's a little hard to understand what the question is. Rashi claims that we're talking about you took less oil than the 2 log, and it wasn't necessarily designated for this offering, and those are the 2 differences. So why wouldn't those be a problem? Because it says riba shamna, chisar shamna. It sounds like any variation of the amount would be an issue. So why did you specifically say Rabbi Elazar like it was 2 log? You might say, look, shemen that's chulin, that doesn't have anything to do with this, doesn't ruin it. And shemen of your friend that's already sanctified doesn't ruin it, right? It's only going to ruin it if you have the 2 log, okay? But matkef and right, it's only going to possibly also if it's its own, it was oil that was sanctified for this offering, and only then it would disqualify. So matkef zutra bar tuvia. Zutra bar tuvia says, no, that can't possibly be. Why? Because we have a case where it doesn't have its own oil. If only its own oil disqualifies, we're going to have a case where it's disqualified and it doesn't even have its own oil. What is that? The Menachot. Remember, the Menachot doesn't have oil designated for it. You're not supposed to put oil in. And it says if you add oil, it's disqualified in the Mishna Nun Teram Bet. So, how are you going to have a case where adding oil ruins it? If it's its own halela, it doesn't have. And we said here, possibly it's only, according to Rabbi Elazar, its own oil and not oil from some other place. And if it's chulin or from someone else, we just said that doesn't disqualify it. So you're never going to have a case where oil will disqualify, and we know the Mishnah says it does. So therefore, Rabbi Elazar lo mebaya kamar. We're going to explain when he said he didn't mean only this case. He did it in what we call a lo mebaya structure, which works like this. Lo mebaya, you don't even need to say, it's obvious. Obviously, if you take someone else's oil and stick it in yours, or chulin oil that wasn't even designated for this offering, and you add it to this offering, of course it's going to disqualify it. Not like we thought before. But if you designated from the beginning 2 log for this offering, you might have thought, you might have thought that what? In the end, what's 2 log? It's 1 log and 1 log. And each one, theoretically, could work for this offering on its own. So maybe you would say, Emalo Lifsel, maybe it actually doesn't disqualify. Kamash Malan, that's why Rabbi Elazar pointed out specifically that case. Okay, and that's how he explained our Mishnah, even though he obviously thinks the other cases, but he thinks our Mishnah is talking about specifically that case, and the other cases would obviously also disqualify. So it's different than how we understood it originally. To which the Gemara says, how did he get this from our Mishnah? Where did he see that that's what the Mishnah is talking about, because that's really what he's explaining. Rava, it's very obvious. Rava says, Manit and Kashite, the language of the Mishnah was hard for him to understand. My area detane ribash shamna. Why did it say? Okay, now focus on the words. Ribash shamna, its own oil, if you add it. It doesn't say riba shemen, right? Line riba la shemen. If it just wanted to say you add extra oil, it would have just said shemen. Why does it say shamna, its own oil? That must be to teach you this case. Even if you designate it for this offering and the amount, right? 1 log and 1 log, and you put them together and say, 2 log, doesn't work out. Okay. Now we're going to move on to the lavona. Okay. Eventually, we're going to actually differentiate between I'm just kind of telling you what's coming up. There's 2 kinds of lavona offerings. One is the lavona, the frankincense that goes, there's actually 3. Okay, we'll talk about all 3 now. There's one that goes with the mincha that we've talked about, goes in the bowl, right? You move it to the side when you do the kemitza, then you take all the frankincense out and bring it to be burned on the altar. That's one. That goes with the mincha. There's one similar to that, which goes with the lechem apanim, which we said was a little different because it's already separated out, right? It's in its own bowls. But it also works in a similar way that the burning of the incense permits the eating of the lechem apanim. Likewise here, the burning of both the kometz and the lavona permit the eating of the remainder of the mincha offering. Then we have a third lavona, which doesn't really talk about directly in the Torah. But if you want to voluntarily bring lavona, certain frankincense to the altar, you can say, I'm bringing an offering of lavona. And then what do? You take a kometz, a handful of the lavona, and then you burn it in the altar. Okay, similar to a mincha, right? You take a big batch, and then you take a handful of it and burn it on the altar. So Tanu Rabbanan. So now it says just in the Mishna simply, if you don't have the right amount, it's a problem. Tanu Rabbanan. A braita says the following. What does it mean? Chisal. How much needs to be missing? Now we would have thought based on what we've been learning a little bit, right? Like the kometz. You're missing a little bit. There's some salt grain mixed in. It ruins it, right? Any sort of part you're missing is a problem. But here it says, surprisingly, chasra v'amda al koret echad psula. Koret usually means, if you have a recipe in Hebrew, it says a koret of salt, it means a pinch. And in fact, in the Kohen, they translate it as pinch, but it can't really be a pinch here, and we'll see why in a minute, because they're going to talk about 1 pinch versus any amount, okay? Which means a pinch is a teeny little bit. There's nothing less than that. So it must be that what we're talking about, and if you Google it and look at what frankincense looks like, right, these like big, nice big brown sugar, crystals, it's crystals basically. So if you take 1 crystal, a koret must be a crystal. If you're left with only 1 crystal, right, imagine you can get a bunch of crystals in your handful. So if you're left with only 1, that's a problem. Al shnei kratin, if you're left with 2, pshera. So you need minimum 2. But you could be missing a lot of it. As long as you have 2 crystals, you're fine. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon Omer, al koret echad kshera, pachot mikam psula. Now here's our proof, okay? Rabbi Shimon says 1 koret is kshera, less than that is no good. Okay, so here you see the difference between a koret and less than that. Okay, less than that is pasul, so it's like 1 is enough according to Rabbi Shimon. To which they question Rabbi Shimon, turning out Amabet v'hatani, doesn't it say in a braita? Now it says in parentheses here Rabbi Shimon Omer, in my Gemara it's in parentheses, because in the actual braita it doesn't say Rabbi Shimon, but it's because it's a Tosefta, so we know we have the text, but it's we know it's Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so take it as this is Rabbi Shimon, even though it doesn't say it. Kometz levona shechasar koshu pasul. Wait a minute, it says if it's missing any little bit, it's disqualified. That's a huge range. In one source, he says, as long as it has one crystal left, we're good. According to Rabbi Shimon and the Tosefta, if there's any little bit missing, it's disqualified. That's a huge difference. So today, koret levona shechasar koshu pasul. Okay, one explanation is to say maybe it was just a mistake, and it should say koret levona that's missing koshu pasul. Right? If you have 1 koret that's missing a teeny bit, it's disqualified. Okay, you follow? That means you can't have any less than one crystal. Okay, because anything missing from there is a problem. And then that means the exact same thing, or ibait emo, or possibly we could differentiate. Kam belevona haba im amincha, kam belevona haba b'fnei atzma. We can differentiate between the different types of lavona offerings. The one that goes with the mincha is a secondary part to the offering. So there, as long as it has one granule, or again, we could call it crystal, it's fine. But in the levona that you say, I'm bringing the levona, this is what I'm bringing to the temple, there you need it to be complete. So if it's missing any little bit, it's no good. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So now we're going to quote Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, who quotes Rabbi Yochanan, and then he's going to say a few things in his name. First he says, Shalosh machlokot badavar. Until now we saw two opinions. 2 korets is enough, or only one? So now he says there's actually 3 opinions, and perhaps Rabbi Meir is the one in our Mishna, who just said simply cheser levona, it's pasul. So Rabbi Meir savar kometz b'tchila v'kometz basof. When you do, okay, tchila is going to be when you take the kemitza of the mincha offering, when you take the kometz out of the dough, where remember we put the frankincense off to the side and take it out, the Kohen does the kemitza, and the second stage, basof, is when you burn it on the altar. So Rabbi Meir says you need a complete handful of levona in the beginning when you did take the kemitza out. That's when you take the kemitza of the dough, right, for the actual kemitza, and kometz basof. And you need a full handful when you burn it on the altar. That seems to be our Mishnah, which is chiser, anything, right? It's no good. And by the way, Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, so it makes sense. For Rabbi Meir saval, kometz b'tchila u'shnei kratim basof. He says you need a kometz at the beginning stage when you take the kometz out. And don't get confused with the 2 kometz. One is the kometz of the levona, and the other is taking out the handful of the dough. At that point, when you take the handful out, you need a kemitza of the levona. But when you go to burn it, you don't. You just need a little bit. Okay, how much? A little bit? 2 kratim, right? 2 granules. Rabbi Shimon savar kometz b'tchila v'koret echad basof. Rabbi Shimon says his opinion that we saw before. He still says you need a kometz like Rabbi Yehuda and like Rabbi Meir at the stage of taking the kemitza out of the meal offering. But when you go to burn it, all you need is one granule. Now they all learned this from the same pasuk. The pasuk says, okay, let's just read the whole pasuk. It's Vayikra Vav pasuk chet. Veherim imenu bekumtzo. Okay, it starts with the taking the kemitza. Misol et hamincha mishamna, from the fine flour and the oil. Ve'et kol halevona asher al mincha. Here it says, and all the levona that's on the mincha. And then it says, Viktir hamizbeach reach nichach, and then you burn it. So right in between the taking the kemitza and the burning is this phrase. Rabbi Meir saval adahavya lelevona diikava bahade mincha meikar. How does he understand et kol levona asher al mincha? All the levona that was with the mincha, meaning it has to be you need to have at the end there when you're about to burn it, which is where the words appear, the whole levona that you had with the mincha from the beginning, meaning you need the whole handful. Rabbi Yehuda savar kol. What does kol mean? Kol can mean everything. It also can mean like a kol shu, any part of it. Okay, so he says it really means any part of it. Bafilu chad koret, even one. Now this is confusing because he said 2. So how does he get to 2? Well, the word et lirabot koret acher, because it says et kol levona, right? So as long as you have something, and then et means double something, so you need 2. Rabbi Shimon et lo darish. Rabbi Shimon basically holds it Rabbi Yehuda, but doesn't darshan the et, and from there he gets to 1. The Amar of Yitzchak bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yochanan, another statement he makes about this. Machloket belevona haba im mincha. This is all, by the way, this is what we saw before. This is all about the levona that goes with the mincha, seemingly because that's what it says in the pasuk. The levona with the mincha. But levona haba b'fnei atzma, but if you're bringing a levona on its own, everyone's going to agree with Rabbi Meir in that case. Divrei hakol, kometz b'tchila v'kometz b'sof, and that works perfectly with what we said earlier, which is that the levona, we're going to distinguish, at least in one of the answers we gave to that difficulty before, that we're going to distinguish between the levona that comes on its own, needs a full kometz, as opposed to the one with the mincha. Lahachi itzrich asher ala mincha. That's why it says, why does it add the words? It just could say, and all the levona. Why does it say all the levona that's on the mincha? To say, this is only when it's with the mincha that you only need a bit. The Amar of Yitzchak bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yochanan, another point he makes, and this is why I brought that there's 3 times we have levona. Right now we only made reference to the 2. Now we're going to talk about the lechem hapanim. Machloke belevona haba mincha. Ava belevona haba bebezichin divrei hakol shnei kmatzim b'tchila u'shnei kmatzim basof. He says, for sure, though, with the one that you that you put in those bizichei levona, you have a kometz in each, and then you take them out and you burn them, you're going to need to burn a full kometz. The Gemara says, pshita, that's pretty obvious. Why do you have to bother telling us this? Well, right, because why would you think any less, right? It's you put a certain amount in there and you go and you burn it. Well, ma'u you might have thought, kevan debahadi lechem atya. Those bizichim go with the bread, and the bread, the lechem apanim, is a mincha offering. So you might have thought that that's included in this verse. Asher al hamincha damya. It's like the mincha asher al levona, the levona asher al mincha, right? It's like that because it's also a levona, frankincense, that goes with a mincha. So you might have thought that, kamash malan. That's why I have to tell you, no, it's not the case. Now, pligi bar Rabbi Ami for Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka. Now we're going to have a machlokah between these two rabbis, with this one in the section. And here we're going to learn something we saw before, and then a new opinion that we didn't see until now. Hadamar, one of them said, we don't know who says what. These are, by the way, two in Eretz Israel. This whole sugya, by the way, interesting, is Rabbi Elazar from Israel, Rabbi Yochanan from Israel. Okay, it's all the Amoraim from Israel. They both say, okay, so one says, machloke b'levona habam in a mincha, ava b'levona haba b'fnei asma divrei hakol kometz b'tchila v'kometz b'sof, exactly as we've seen until now. Nobody thinks otherwise. In the levona that comes on its own, you need a kometz when you go to burn it. You can't, everyone agrees with that. But Chadamal, we didn't see this opinion yet. The machloket is in every case of levona. And that's probably because this is the only place where levona is mentioned in the Torah, right? It's not, it's mentioned here, it's mentioned lechem apanim, but this is the main place. There is no discussion of if you want to bring a levona, this is what you do. So then maybe it applies across the board. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah. Chisar levonotah psula. Now notice the Mishnah was a little in parallel. It says, if you're missing if you put too much oil or too little oil, it's a problem. If you're missing some of the levona, it's psula. It never says anything about putting too much levona. So ha-yatir kshira, it sounds like if you put too much, it's fine. Vahatanya, doesn't it say in a braita though, yatir psula? It says it's disqualified if you put too much. So amarami barchama, kigon shefrish lashnei kamatzim. This is like the two log. Even though with the shemen, we said in the end it's not the case, even if you put a little bit more. But with the levone, it would only be a problem if you added two. If you just have a little more, a little less, now, where would we get this from? That the kemitza has to be exact. Not too much, not too little, right? It has to be exact, precise. We already saw from the previous sugya that it doesn't have to be precise for the frankincense, because we said, the Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda said that if you're missing, right, you could be missing down to even just one granule or two granules. So it's clear it's not as much of a precise measurement as the kemitza has to be. So therefore, it makes sense to say that only if it's, let's say, double, then it looks like, that's really a straying from what you're supposed to bring. And Rami Barham is going to say some other things about this. What if you start with two and then you lose one? And then you end up with one kometz full of frankincense when you go to burn it. Is that okay? So it depends when you lost it. Kohen kemitza lo hukbu. What's important? We've talked about this a lot. The moment you take the kemitza out, not the kemitza of the levona, right? We're talking about you have the dough, you have the frankincense on top, you move the frankincense aside and you take the kometz from the dough, which is the main central part, even though you also have to burn the levona, but that's the main central part. At that moment, when you take the kemitza, if you lost it before that point and you only have one kometz of frankincense at that point, it's fine. Okay, lo hukubu. It wasn't determined that, you put double. But achar kemitza hukubu. But if it's after kemitza, if the time of kemitza you had two, even if you lost one before you went to burn them, it's ruined. Because at the moment of kemitza, that's when it's determined, did you put the right amount in or not? V'amarami barchama, now he's going to do a similar thing for the bizichei levona. He's going to say, right, with the lechem apanim, hifrish arba'a kmatzim l'shnei bizichim. What if you took 4 handfuls instead of the 2 for the 2 bizichim? Let's say you put 2 in one and 2 in the other, v'avdu shnai mehen, and then you lost them. So what's the determining moment? Kodem siluk bizichim. It's right. The similar thing to the kemitza is when you remove the bowls from the table, right? When you're moving the breads also. So if you do it before that, lo hukbu, it's fine. La'achar siluk bizichim hukbu. So what's the main issue? What's the main time that it's determined? Do you have too many? At the moment you remove them from the table. So the Gemara says, Hatu lama li hanuhach. Okay, we just said the same thing twice. One in the kemitza, right? We know kemitza is like siluk bizichim. Why are you telling us this? Well, you might remember this from a different sugya, which we actually did say this. Here we're going to say we don't say it for this. Ma'u detema kevan de burir kometz dida. it's already, this is different. The frankincense one, it's mixed together with the other stuff, right? It's placed on the top of this. Here, it's completely separated. You might have thought, since it's completely separated and you put two in there and two in there, and that's really not the right amount, then what would be the determining factor? Not when you actually remove them, but when the time comes for removal. Remember, we saw that that had significance in a different sugya with the breaking. If the bread breaks, right, after the time where it was already supposed to be removed, we say it's okay at that point, right? You can burn the lavona then. So you might have thought, since the time came, maybe it's as if you already took them off and then it would be ruined, but no, it's not. This case we allow. Okay, we're going to end with this Mishnah. It's going to sound very, very familiar, I hope. Hakometz et hamincha le'echol shi'areh b'chutz. Okay, for those who learn tzvachim. If you take the kometz out of the mincha to eat the shirayim b'chutz, okay, while you're doing the kemitza, which is like the shchita and a korban, you have a pebble thought. You have a thought that you're going to eat the remainder outside. Okay, I mentioned that we're getting back to pebble, and I said you can listen to Din and Daf this week. So you have a thought that you're going to eat the remainder outside the azara, which you're not allowed to. Or kazayit mishareh b'chutz, or you're going to eat a kazayit of the remainder. Or, okay, now remember, it's to eat either eating or eating on the altar, meaning the part that's supposed to be burnt. Or your thought is laktir kumtza b'chutz, you're going to burn the kometz outside. Or, right, you have to burn it on the altar, which is inside the courtyard. O kazayit mikumtza b'chutz, or even just a kazayit of the kometz outside. O laktir levona tabachutz, and here we have something additional. Also, the lavona is supposed to be burned. If you have your thought while you're taking the kometz about the lavona, that you're going to burn it outside. Pasul ve'embo karet. So this is pasul, but there's no karet. Why? Chutzlim komo is in karet. Because remember, the context of the pasuk was eating it beyond its time, not eating it outside. So it's a problem, but you don't get karet, because the pasuk talks specifically about karet. Le'echol shi'areh lemachar, o kazayit mishareh lemachar. Now, if you think I'm going to eat the remainder tomorrow, that's what we call chutz lizmano, outside of its time. That's going to be the case, pigul with karet, punishment. Or you can eat kazayit from the remainder tomorrow. Or lahaktir kumtza lemachar, you're going to burn the kometz tomorrow. Or kazayit mikumtza lemachar, you're going to burn a part of it, right, a kazayit of it tomorrow. Or laktir levona talemachar, or to burn the levona tomorrow. Pigul v'chayavim ala karet. That's pigul, and you get karet. Okay, there we're going to end in the middle of this Mishnah. A long Mishnah anyway. We'll finish it up tomorrow. All the repeat of what we saw in Tzvachim, we're now going to see here. Okay, if you didn't learn Tzvachim, don't worry. We'll fill you in. We'll get you up to date, and also for those who don't remember this also. We'll be dealing with this for the next while. So what we did today, we really discussed the measurements and how it's taken, how we do the kemitza with the measurements, right? What's too much, too little, with the lavona also. We talked about with the oil, what was too much, too little, how does that work? Then we got into this debate about the lavona, how much needs to be left for it to be, right, three-way machloket. And then we got to actually too much is not a problem unless it's double. And we had some other things along the way, but that was the most of our daf. And then we ended with the beginning of our sugya of pigul for the mincha offering. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.